law about limiting people coming in. What enforcement power do they have? The court.
Yeah, so we're in dangerous territory.
Yes.
When one person from an obscure state or anybody in the country, we have Hawaii, now California, can put down or shut down a policy by the executive branch or the president, it's very, very dangerous. It's dangerous to our country.
My point being, though, they only can do it if the executive agrees with it, because the judiciary has no enforcement power.
Yeah, so exactly. You're
treading on thin ice.
Well, that's brings
but
us to.
But it needs to be tread on.
Yeah, and that brings us to really what's going on with the pressure that's put to bear by the intelligentsia of this country and the FBI, is that they're using that control over the president and Jeff Sessions so that he won't enforce the laws everywhere else. One of the things that, if any of the listeners are curious about the differences between the candidates, you really have to listen to President Trump came up with a travel ban from countries where we don't know how to vet people, right? Okay? And that went to the Supreme Court. The arguments before the Supreme Court were shameful. They went 30 minutes trying to avoid the use of the word Muslim, Islam, and terrorism in a 30-minute argument before this. I have never seen Yale and Harvard attorneys stumble around so hard. They have a complete lack of understanding about this war. When the highest levels of our government are afraid to talk about an issue, we're on the verge of losing our democratic republic, our constitutional republic.
Do you fear a civil war?
The reason I'm running is because I am scared. We are completely in debt. We have $1 trillion deficit every year on a $4 trillion budget. $1 out of $4 is made up.
That's unsustainable.
You know who we're selling that to? We're selling it to our enemies.
China.
We're selling it to China. We're selling it to Saudi Arabia. These people control. That's what economic blackmail is all about. That's why it's so important to refight these trade battles. Get on the right side with China. We have to have trade balances. Right now it's $800 billion trade imbalances with the world. We can't continue that. We can't continue our economic malaise that's going on. We're at full employment. How do we expect to get $1 trillion made up? We have to make tough decisions. We have to have leaders, not politicians.
Yes.
We need to have statesmen, not career politicians. That's what we need right now, and I'm prepared to do it.
Okay, let me switch gears again. I spent 28 years in the Navy.
Thank you, sir.
Every few months, I had to go through a procedure we called Operation Golden Flow. How come our politicians don't have to do this? They're leading us. They're telling us our rules that we have to go by, mandating that we have these tests. But they don't mandate it for themselves.
Yeah, I tried to bring that up this year, along with Representative Goodwin. We tried to have legislators do the Golden Flow test. It took me a couple of seconds to understand what he was talking about here, but we're talking about drug testing for folks.
Yeah, pee in the cup.
That's right. That was a very delicate and ingenious way to describe your your operation there. But it's true. One of the concerns that I have is we have a drug epidemic that's going on. We talk about a labor shortage in the state. The problem is that we have a lack of people that are actually capable of providing labor. Where half of the kids are graduating from high school habitually using marijuana, and we don't even care. We're slapping the hands of people, and we're putting them right back into the same situations. We got to be tough. We can't allow a generation or 2 generations of kids be addicted to drugs. They're not capable. The pathway to getting out of poverty is through use of your hand, blue collar work, welding and truck driving, all of those industries that are
Honest work.
good middle class jobs, and we have a larger and larger segment of the population that can't go to work because they can't pass a drug test. And it goes all the way up to the legislature. If we drug tested the legislature, I think that half the people would have to go home.
Carnegie, Mellon, Rockefeller, all started by getting their knuckles dirty.
Yeah,
Every last one of them had dirt under their fingernails
that's
before
right.
they became billionaires.
And one of the problems with people in politics is this career politics. People don't have dirt on their fingernails. They go to school to become attorneys, and those, I don't know. I love attorneys when I get in trouble, but they shouldn't be there making policy. They're not.
I may like one attorney when I get in trouble. I may not like the other.
That's true. You only like half the attorneys even then, right?
How do we get away from the career politician?
Well, President Trump has shown us the way, right?
Yes, I mean, but how do you get the career politician to say, I am doing away with my own job?
Yeah, you need.
Are we talking in Article 5?
Well,
I know it's a tough.
No,
a lot of people don't like to talk about an Article 5, but
well, okay. So there's two. I was a huge advocate when Mark Levin was talking about the Convention of States in Article 5. Recently, I don't know if we have 15 years to get that through the process. I see an economic collapse if we don't do some things very, very quickly. Okay, so we have trillion-dollar deficits. We have $21 trillion in debt. We have an endless war on terror. That's not counting what's coming up with Medicare and Medicaid. Those are going to actually add another $500 to a $1 trillion. We're on an unsustainable path. So the question is, are we going to get to a point of unsustainability before the Convention of States can get passed, or is it after? My thought is that it's after. The reason I'm running, I put in almost $200,000 into this run of my own cash.
Yes.
I'm not a wealthy person. I care about this country. If we don't do something now, if we don't face issues now, we have to take all of our effort and we have to pour it into supporting our president and doing everything we can to talk about tough issues. That's why I'm running, that's why I'm here, is to talk to you about all the things that every politician avoids.
We have to quit kicking the can down the road.
We have to. And you know what that difference is? I go to these Lincoln Day dinners and my opponents that talk about they have 1-point plans, 3-point plans, 8-point plans. It's like they need a 12-step program. First you have to admit that you're a career politician type of a deal, right? Okay. That's simple-mindedness. The idea that you're going to go there and you're going to sit at the table and that you have 145 pounds to put behind your ideas, give me a break. This is major problems. And the way you have to solve these major problems is you have to be willing to go to the mattresses. You have to be willing to say that we're going to shut the government down and we're going to do that in order to protect our country for our kids. And that means that when you're in a negotiation, you can't take that off the table. Every Republican in leadership, everyone, are you going to get along? No, it's time not to get along. It's time to fight. And you have to be willing to shut the government down. What happens is these omnibus bills that you hear about, nobody wants to, if that's off the table, you get right up to that impending deadline, and all of a sudden the only way to get it through is to pile everything up. They call it a Christmas tree bill. Well, we can't do that anymore. We have to be able to say, no, this is it. We're going to do this for our kids and our grandkids, and you need eloquent people that are articulate, that are going to be able to fight. Right now we have politicians controlled by fear.
How do you feel about the idea that most states have term limits, balanced budgets, and line item veto? Why shouldn't the federal government have all three of those?
Yeah, and that's the reason. Dusty Johnson goes around and he talks about we got to do things more like we do in South Dakota, out in Washington. Well, South Dakota has a balanced budget. You go 40 days and you have to have a balanced budget. That means through existing cash flow or one-time money, you're going to have to come up with a way to balance that budget. You're forced to do it. In Washington, D.C., you're not forced to do it. You have an endless amount of money with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury that can sell bonds around the world. It's corruption.
Sit down in the basement and brim it.
Yeah, that's right. And that's
And
what
they
we're
do.
doing. That's what we're doing. And so one of the solutions is to come up with a balanced budget. So then you have to go through a process of balancing the budget or having line item veto. Reagan tried to do that. We tried to do that. The bottom line is you have to have politicians or leaders that go to Washington that are willing to risk their careers or their elected position and do the right thing. Okay?
Which is where term limits would come in.
And term limits, you are bringing up every issue that is, these are all long conversations. Yes, the term limits issue is the real power in Washington, what people don't understand. I've served there for 2 years. I've watched as this happens. You get a green congressman that comes in, and they don't know anything. They don't even know where the bathrooms are in these big buildings.
But they're full of vim and vinegar.
Oh, they're going to solve the world's problems, right? Well, it's not. It doesn't work that way. You have committees. So you have like right now we're discussing the farm bill. The farm bill, the Department of Agriculture sits on about 12 square blocks. If you walk through that hallways, there's a Department of Rutabaga. There's somebody that's trying to figure out how to have good rutabaga policy. This is massive amounts of business. Okay, 20% of the farm bill deals with agriculture and sugar subsidies in different ways to protect the farmers' safety net. 80% is food stamps and SNAP and different things like that, right? All right, so it's the full-time staff and the lobbyists that really write all these massive bills. So what you really need are people that are well qualified and competent, that are congressmen, that can put a fork or a wedge into those gears, that can just shut that thing down. It's the full-time staff. The incentives are for the full-time staff to get to know the lobbyists. And then once they write all those bills, they get those big cushy jobs. The same thing happens in South Dakota. The former leader of the Senate is a guy named Tim Ray. He was an EMT. I don't know what he gets paid, maybe $40,000, $50,000. He becomes a Senate Majority Leader, and he goes to Sanford, and he gets probably paid $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. The incentive for all these establishment politicians is to go into government and then multiply your earnings. That's how government works. You have to have people that are willing to go and do the opposite, give up high-paying jobs, sacrifice, and do the right thing over and over and over again. And it takes naming names. That's why I'm running. I'm not in this it's not a popularity contest. I'm not here to make friends. I walked around the Capitol. Half the time, nobody even talked to me. But I stood there.
Well, no, because you speak your mind properly.
That's right. But we need people that are just willing to say, this is what's going on, and we're going to expose it. That's what we need.
Another question. According, as I believe, to the Constitution, education is left up to the states. Why do we need a federal Department of Education?
The Federal Department of Education is a money laundering program.
Yes.
Back to state programs to empower
Why not just let us keep
the
it to
teachers
begin
union.
with?
That's right. And what's really, really bad right now is that the textbooks and the people that are writing the textbooks are owned by generally 3 different companies in London. Several of them are owned by Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones that are pushing this liberal agenda, but then the whitewashing of what Islam is all about. I mean, we're indoctrinating people by having this large Common Core type of a program.
And forgetting large parts of history.
Yeah.
The kids are not learning history.
And make no mistake, establishment politicians in South Dakota, career politicians, grease the skids for Common Core to come into our schools. And we have to fight that. And you can say that you're going to go drain the swamp in Washington. Truth is, you were a part of the swamp. You helped encourage this in South Dakota. It was the same thing with Obamacare, greasing the skids to make it easier to get rid of private sector and accessing those federal dollars. The same thing is happening. When I ran for the state legislature 2 years ago, it was almost a guarantee that South Dakota was going to expand Medicaid. My election turned the control of the Senate from the majority of anti-government or governor people to people that were opposed to expansion, and that was killed. But we were so close to taking the Medicaid, where we would have 105,000 people in South Dakota getting free health care and free mental care, up to 160 to 170,000 people. We've only got 800,000 people. That's 1 out of 5 people receiving completely free health care. Meanwhile, I'm an employer and I'm trying to hire people. The incentive is to stay on those federal dollars or those state programs. We have to have programs that incentivizes hard work and sacrifice and thrift. Our ancestors, our forefathers would have cringed that somehow you think you can pour coffee for 40 hours a week and you can have a Mercedes-Benz and a house and a car and health care. No.
Flipping burgers is not a career.
People I know an incredible number of people that are successful. 40 hours happens by Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday. Hard work is what gets you to success. And we're encouraging people not to work hard. And people are that's really what the Trump effect was all about. It was all these blue-collar workers, factory workers, union workers that are coming over. You know, I was a state director for the Trump campaign.
Yes.
And I was an early adopter because I recognized early that it's the producers of this world that are frustrated about all these free government programs and the growing largesse of government. Our job is to side with those people. Our job is to have a nationalist policy that protects our producers in farming and ranching, people that are getting up and working hard for a living. Those are the people we need to fight for. We don't need to fight for the people that are using government programs to have a pretty nice lifestyle.
Yes. It's not meant to, it's supposed to be a career. No.
It's a generational career.
Yeah.
They should also. What was your golden shower?
Yeah, Operation Golden Flow.
Oh, we need to have Operation. Okay. I don't know why you're laughing. Clearly in the question.
Specifically. Very specifically.
Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi just jump on the bandwagon, just ridiculing him for using the word animal. I'm telling you, these people are pure evil, and you have to fight them that way.
Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi wouldn't make a good pimple on the butt of humanity.
Yeah, that's where they are.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'll just say it out loud. I have a way with words.
Couple of T words come to mind.
You know what?
Treason and traitor.
You know what's interesting? Here's another big difference: is career politicians. You can tell them by their actions. So I was working in northern Colorado. I gave up my job temporarily in North Dakota selling equipment to the oil fields, and I'm volunteering basically for the Trump campaign, leading volunteers door to door. And I read on my phone a tweet by Governor Dugard and by John Thune saying that Donald Trump should drop out of the race and Mike Pence should take his place. They were supporting the pimple.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They were providing a pad for that pimple. That's the problem with career politicians. That was a strategic move to get on the good side of a communist, Marxist operation.
Of the mainstream Republican.
That's right.
Party.
And that's how career politicians work. You know you've been there too long when you pull stuff like that. When those of us in the trenches are pulling everything we have. And people, I love politics. They're saying, oh, Neal can't win, so we're going to support this other person. That's baloney. If everybody that thinks alike stands together, we win. That's what Trump proved. That's what we have to do.
He has proven it, too.
That's right. There's more of us than there are of them.
Every day.
That's
we're
right.
going to have a nuclear war with Korea because you talk badly about Rocket Man.
That's right.
Now we're getting ready to sit down and talk. I understand, the way I see it, internal pressure from his own people is causing him to back up a little bit, is what I would guess.
It's a challenge, trying to fill a
but
government.
But that meeting is going to happen.
That's right.
One way or another, that meeting's going to happen.
I think Kim Jong-un fears for his own life.
From his own people.
From his own people, that's right.
That's why he's backing off. But I think it's going to happen anyhow.
Mm-hmm. But you look at President Trump, he faces every issue head on over and over and over again. When it was getting Neil Gorsuch onto the bench. We're going to do whatever it takes. We've got 4 years, maybe 8 years to get this country turned in the right direction. We need everybody pulling in the right way, pulling the wagon, not jumping on the bandwagon.
And we have the FBI and the Department of Justice actively acting against their boss.
Yeah.
They're the executive branch. Why are they not doing what the boss says?
The swamp is deep, my friend.
Oh, deep state is alive and well.
Yeah, you need good people. You need good people. You know, sometimes you think, boy, you're from South Dakota, you're one of 435 people. The truth is that you need statesmen in every position. And
Yes,
every
you do.
position, you need people that are willing to face problems head on. Donald Trump is the first person that has faced, even when he reads the snake poem. You've heard the snake poem, right? When he reads that, it's a sign. He's giving a message saying that I know what's going on with Islamic migrations. You beware of the snake. That's what he's really saying.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, the people in the administration that work for him, they're afraid to talk about it. And that's a shame. We need people that are willing to go to Washington, that are willing to talk about it, that not just are willing to talk about it, but are experienced and understand it. I've read the Quran twice. I've gone to national symposiums. I understand this. I've talked to world leaders about this issue. You need people that are credible, that are courageous, that are willing to talk about complex issues. That's what we need right now in politics. We've had
We
too
need
many
honesty.
We need honesty.
Honesty, pure and simple. Call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
We need honesty. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But tell me why you think that way.
Defend what you believe.
Defend what you believe. Don't just say it because you think it sounds good and your neighbor's saying it.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with career politicians, that habit of protecting the machine and of being in the business of being invested in protecting the machine and perpetuating the careers of your friends and making sure that they're doing okay, and even if they stick their foot in it a little bit or a whole lot and we end up with dead bodies, that running interference for the machine and helping to perpetuate that, it becomes a habit.
Oh, yeah.
And those things are transferred from every level of government,
because
right up every rung of the ladder.
If I do that for him, he'll do it for me.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if people have done it in pure South Dakota, they will continue to protect the political machine when they get to Washington, D.C. We cannot afford it. We don't have time in this country, as you know, and this is what Neal was talking about. We do not have time to continue to send career politicians to Washington and expect that anything is going to change.
We have 50 states and several territories that have exactly the same problem. And we've got to start locally at home. Right here. We in South Dakota are responsible for South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
We can help our neighbors, but we're responsible for South Dakota. If everybody starts thinking like that, maybe we'll get somewhere.
Yeah, it's hard to ferret out all of the problems. So there's a representative, Christy Conzit. Are you familiar with Christy Conzit?
No.
Christy Conzit, I think, is the daughter of Fisher Rounds. So the Fisher of Fisher Rounds. So Mike Rounds' is business partner. She was put into or nominated. Somebody resigned, and she was placed into government service. It's kind of a pattern of how the establishment works, is that a person before an election will resign, and then a new person is appointed so that they become an incumbent. It gives you an advantage. That's how the establishment protects itself. So she was appointed to a position of, but what's interesting is she was a grant writer for the Gear Up program. And so all of us sitting around this table, what I'm about to tell you, we would object to the very principle of the way the government works. But in the GOAC committee, we were trying to understand who was writing the grants, when all these grants came up, and she came forward and says, well, you have to understand that the federal government didn't require any accountability. They were just, before 2008, they were just giving money hand over fist. They didn't require anything. See, if you and I and business owners were in government, we would shut that, we would publicize that, and we would shut that program down. Establishment career politicians, They go with it.
That's free
It's
money.
a way of lining their pockets.
Oh, sure.
It's horribly despicable.
Agreed.
And they don't even realize that there's a problem.
Right.
It's so ingrained in who they are. Not Marty Jackley, not Chantel Krebs, not Dusty Johnson would ever say something is wrong with that. I do. Stace Nelson does.
Mm-hmm.
Stace Nelson, the gal from Kyle, Elizabeth May, she does. There's a lot of patriots that are fighting for this, but boy, do we get ridiculed. We said,
yeah.
if you want to get something passed, I got pulled aside so many times, if you want to get anything passed, you better go along and get along.
Play along.
That's
Yeah.
your first discussion. Are you a team player? That's what they ask all freshman legislators. Are you a team player? What that is saying is, are you willing to sell yourself out? Okay?
You're willing to sell your soul to the devil?
Now, you have Paul Ryan that's he's running the business for all the globalists over there, the open borders crowd.
Yes.
Right? So you have really two choices. When you go to Washington, you have two choices. You either join leadership so that when there's a drought in South Dakota, you have that association with leadership and they're able to get stuff back for you, right? So you can get reelected. The other option is to join the Freedom Caucus, which I will do, and I will fight that leadership and I'll fight that system. The downfall is that when you fight the system, you don't have that access to those programs, right? So that's the choice that you make, especially as a lone representative of South Dakota. What I bring to the table is that I have a relationship with the Trump administration. The Trump administration is on our side. They're fighting for the producer. Mm-hmm. So when things go wrong, we have a direct line, not just as a person that's on the bandwagon, but somebody that was there from the very beginning. That's what I bring to the table, is that we're going to fight for what's right with the Freedom Caucus. And I hear, it's interesting, Dusty Johnson is going around talking about, it's quite shocking how he's going to sit down and get pop out of the welfare program. He's going to sit at a table and he's going to rewrite the whole welfare program. And you're thinking, wow, that's really incredible that you're the first guy that's ever thought about this one. Well, the truth is that you have to be willing to shut the government down in order to get that. That's really what the Farm Bill negotiation is all about, is trying to get...
The first thing you have to do is remove the revolving door for the lobbyists.
You have to shut the government down. Yeah. If you take that negotiation off the table,
that will shut it down.
You will never ever fix the problem. The Democrats are just continually pushing against what's right, and the Republican establishment is right along with it. That's how we have no difference between Republicans and Democrats.
Money's coming from the same pockets.
Exactly.
And Carl, we sometimes you get so engrossed in a conversation, but let's do some housekeeping.
Okay.
You want me to do a legal ID for the Country Twins?
Please do.
This is KBFS KYDT Belfouche Sundance. 1450 AM. Is that right?
And 103.1
and 103.1 FM. And you're listening to Neal Tapio. He's candidate for Congress in South Dakota. He will appear at the top of your June 5th primary ballot, and you don't need to look below the top line. He's seeking the GOP nomination. He's on top for a reason. And people listening to this conversation have to undoubtedly know that they're listening to just a very distinct difference between somebody who's calculated, somebody who's a marketing product, who's a career politician, somebody who's just engrossed and embedded in and approved and stamped and approved by the establishment, or somebody who had the courage and the guts and the gusto, as I think you and I both did too, Carl, to recognize the Trump phenomenon before it even happened, because we were already talking about the same things that Donald Trump did. He came along, he tapped into that, and he advanced that essential message about Americana and about American exceptionalism and the rebirthing of the American dream.
As you know from my Facebook post, we're friends on Facebook.
That's right.
I backed Donald Trump the day he said he was running.
We are all three of us are in agreement with that. Neal was on board with it very early.
And I never backed off.
And you and I are in a little more comfortable territory. In Western South Dakota, you get away with this. Neal's over here in Eastern South Dakota, and he was the Trump guy.
The People's Republic of South Dakota.
In the Democrat wing of the Republican Party. That's
in Minnesota West. Neal Tapio was talking about Donald Trump at the same time that you and I were too. And so this is something that comes very genuinely from his heart. He's a conservative with some good libertarian streaks through him too, and is somebody who's going to take a very different approach to Washington D.C. So I would just encourage people. We have to be done with the era of career politics. Career politics will be the death of the country, or we have to institute. You talk about term limits, Carl. Term limits happen at the ballot. Term limits happen at the ballot, and unless there are term limits for lobbyists, all term limits for legislators is going to do is more firmly entrench the power and the expertise of the technocrats on Capitol Hill. Because what happens, you get these new wet behind the ears lawmakers who are not savvy and haven't seen as much of the world as a Neal Tapio. They walk in the front door, and instantly they're co-opted. They're co-opted by people who are much more sophisticated, much more wizened in the ways and the leverages of the way the power structure operates in Washington, and they're not taught the two-step. They're taught the Potomac, 4 and 5 step.
Yeah.
And this situation.
I have often tried to make that point.
Yes.
Term limits, yes, a good idea. However, unintended consequences. You have all these freshmen or second termers talking to career bureaucrats who have been there 30, 40 years.
The establishment chooses candidates. Just never mistake that. Dusty Johnson is a chosen person by the Dugard administration to continue that, the Rounds, Dugard, Dusty Johnson, Rounds, Dugard, Jackley. It's all a part of the establishment, right? It's how they choose you. You gotta love these politicians. You have to have sophistication. I haven't talked a little bit about my background, but I've started a dozen businesses. Some of them have failed. Many of them have been very successful. I close deals in the boardrooms all around the country. I sell equipment all around the world. I do business at a high level. I built 30 spec homes. I've done all kinds of different things.
If you don't fail, you're not doing anything.
That's right. But you need people with experience. I entered in 2008. I was a spec home builder in Sioux Falls. I had $1.5 million worth of homes plus my personal home of $2 million of inventory. They shut down the jumbo loan program. I was building $400,000 homes. No way to sell a home. 6 months later, I'm mowing my yard trying to figure out, gaining 30 pounds, trying to figure out how to make this thing work. Okay, this was 2007. Even before then, I started, my family are builders, and I went to the Senator Thune's staff. My good friend of mine was his chief of staff, legislative director, and I said, do you know what a mortgage-backed security is? Do you know what a collateralized debt obligation is? And I saw blank stares, and it scared me. We're creating incentives of home ownership, which is called a ninja loan. No income, no job, no asset. They were financing 105% of a house's value, saying things like, the home is the best investment you'll ever see. It'll never go down. Meanwhile, I have friends and relatives that are building homes on the West Coast, and we see taxi cab drivers buying $550,000 homes. In Florida, you have waitresses buying 3rd, 4th, and 5th homes as investment properties. And you're thinking, this is going to be a major collapse. If those people were honest, they would come out and talk about the conversation that I had with them. I said, this is going to be the biggest economic collapse that you'll ever see, period. And they didn't even know what was coming. That's what's scary. Not one press release predicting all these problems. That's not how politicians work. What politicians do is they blame things when things go wrong. They never take credit. I'm trying to do the same for the refugee resettlement program. I'm predicting that that's problematic. And all I do is, from establishment politicians, is I get criticism. I get name called. You know what? We have to have people that have foresight, not hindsight.
Another thing, pet peeve of mine, and I would like your thought on it. Congress votes on bills every day.
Mm-hmm.
Our congressmen have never read them. They may have had staff who glanced at it and said, hey, that's a good thing, go with it. Will you, as our representative, at least make an effort to read The preamble.
It's okay. You know, Dusty Johnson goes around saying he's for smaller government, limited lower taxes, right? Okay, the reason you want smaller government is that when it gets so big, you don't have time to do all this stuff. Just in Pierre, we had 600 bills come through. How do you go through 600 bills in 2 months with part-time legislators with 0 staff, right? Mm-hmm. When you expand the size and scope of government so big, when you get involved in EB-5 and Gear Up and refugee resettlement programs, when you've got so many things, you don't have time to do anything well. So then all you do is you work on the small things. Meanwhile, the ship is heading right for a huge storm and you don't even see it because you don't have your eyes up. That's the problem with government, is that these bills come in and they're trying to solve problems for everything. I mean, you got they're writing checks to people, and it's what are we doing?
The only way to fix anything, I think, according to government, is throw money at it.
That's all they can. Here's another issue. I'm the vice chair of the health committee, and I have completely opposite. You know, we talk about the Democrat wing of the Republican Party. The vice chair, or the chair, is a lady that works for Avera, and she's a nice enough woman. But she completely believes that we should provide the same health care to illegal aliens as to legal people. And you're thinking, wait, how can we afford it? If we don't have a country with borders, and we don't, if you have to look at our country as kind of a union, that we have negotiated safety nets that we've taken care of. If you lose your job, we're going to take care of you. If you are disabled for some reason, maybe not democratically disabled, where your mind is askew, voting Democrat, we don't want to take care of that. But we have a safety net. We could. Yeah. But we have a safety net. But to have a safety net, you have to have borders. You have to protect your people. Okay. If you provide all these services for people that don't even live here, that aren't a part of our country, that aren't citizens, what do you have left? You just have a wealth transfer.
Why is it we see so many of these California high school kids saying they want amnesty and all that, but they're holding a Mexican flag, not an American flag?
Yeah.
That tells me they want to be Mexican.
That's
not
right.
American.
Well, you know what La Raza is, right?
Oh, yes.
La Raza is the race.
The race.
The race. So here's, Republicans are great negotiators, right? So the race wants to actually disband California and make that a part of Mexico. That's really what their stated objective is, okay? So then therefore DACA, and therefore providing services for illegal aliens. But their real stated objective is to take over a southwestern part of the country because they believe it is still part of Mexico. Okay, that's who you're negotiating with.
The heck with 1836, 1846 era.
Meanwhile, but here's the failure of Republicans. Meanwhile, you have Marco Rubio and John Thune and McConnell, and they're coming up with saying, hey, we have to actually negotiate with these people. Right? That's like saying, I'm going to go in a negotiation. You have $100, I have 0. I want half. And you say, no. I'll just give you 25%. Who wins and who loses? All of a sudden, I've got 25% of what you had. Now I say, I want another half. And pretty soon, you continually negotiate. That's how our country slides down. Prescription Part D. I was a huge opponent of it back then. It was one of the things that John Thune voted for it, right? Hey, yes. And now he's talking about we got to get a control of our entitlement programs. No, you were a part of expanding the entitlement programs. We have to actually be honest with people.
My Social Security is not an entitlement program. I earned it. I put money into it. My bosses put money into it. That's not an entitlement.
Yeah.
As much as they want to change the name.
One of the failures of our side is that we allowed things to get named. So it's called Social Security insurance, right? Okay. All right. So the idea is that when it was first started, there were 15 workers that paid for the insurance or the usage of the one person that was on it. Right now, it's 3 people that are working for one person that's on it. It's going down to 2 people. Okay. That system, which it was sold as it was your
it's
work.
eventually going to go negative.
Okay, it is. It's already gone negative. It's already flipped. And so now we're drawing out of what was considered a trust fund. Well, the trust fund is just a bunch of IOUs. So every time we pull one out, we have to write another IOU. That's how the whole program works. We have to be very honest with people, right? I mean, and we're not. We're living on the edge right now, and we have to have very serious discussions about stuff like this.
Big changes are coming whether we like it or not.
True story.
And Carl, what you just heard again, that's not a politically popular message.
No.
It's not a politically popular thing to say, look, this wonderful system that was put in place with all these good intentions and compassion and all of that, eventually,
Great society.
Eventually, LBJ's Great Society, eventually the Great Society is going to be no more. And we're going to have to break all these promises to these generations. And the reality of the matter is, the math doesn't work. And so there has to be, and what Neal has just said, is that there has to be a forthright conversation about something. We have to deal with reality on reality's terms. And career politicians they're masters at shifting reality and talking about things in ways that sound really good in campaign slogans, but that have absolutely no bearing in fact and no basis in what's actually happening in the real world. And we can play dumb. It's just like what happened. Neal talked about the collapse, the 2007, 2008 collapse. Realize, you remember the summit that interrupted, the financial summit, the crisis summit that interrupted the 2008 election? It didn't happen until Lehman Brothers and Countrywide both collapsed. And then suddenly we rush to Washington because there has to be an emergency meeting to fix the problem. And as Neal said, we need people with foresight, not with hindsight. That was a hindsight summit. That was a summit. They didn't want to fix what they did that wrecked the entire thing.
But they didn't even take responsibility.
No.
They would never ever accept responsibility. Franklin Raines and what was going on with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They're getting paid millions and millions of dollars. They're all Democratic operatives.
Yes.
Right.
Oh man.
There was absolutely no acknowledgement of the cause and effect between the policies that said that everybody was entitled to a home. Everybody was entitled to a home loan.
Regardless of economic reality.
They didn't get together in Washington to admit their fault. They got there to say, look what fell on us from the clear blue sky, and now let's just take lots and lots of taxpayer money
this happen?
and fix it.
I think the only thing that we owe our fellow citizens is a tent under a bridge, if they want shelter, if they're not willing to work for it. Harsh?
You know what is that Americans are the most generous people in the world.
Now, if they have a disability of some kind that prevents them from working,
That's right.
I'm not talking laziness. That's not a disability.
Just voting Democrat is.
Well,
I can't say that.
Yeah, you can.
And let's say it again. Carl Grummel, we're having a conversation with Neal Tapio, Republican candidate for Congress in South Dakota.
And thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure to have you here.
Let's do this again.
Love to.
After we win the
Good
primary.
talking.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
All right.
And we now go back to the Lori Room Show.
Oh, we bumped Laura. Nice. All right, so Golden Flow, Operation Golden Flow. We need to test people that are on welfare programs. That's just a part of what we need to do. We can encourage people to have a lifestyle that doesn't include work. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay. I know there was.
In all fairness, Carl, you started it.
Yes, I did. Oh.
We'll put it back on you. Can I say? Let me talk a little bit about what Neal's been talking about in terms of the difference between the career politicians in this race, Chantel Krebs and Dusty Johnson, and Neal Tapio, who you're listening to right here on the Country Twins with the esteemed Carl Grimmelman. When you talk about
and the most esteemed Shadows.
Well, that's another point for another day. But we're hearing such interesting messages in this race. One of the things that Chantel has just been famous for saying is that she wants to fulfill the promise of repealing and replacing Obamacare. Republicans have been running on this for how many elections now, Carl? It's been, are we up to 10?
Yeah,
10
easily.
election cycles, or, I'm exaggerating for effect. 4 or 5 election cycles, Republicans have promised that we're going to repeal and we're going to replace Obamacare. Finally, we get it out of the way. There's been kind of a half-hearted attempt to do something with health care. Let's look at the reality of the fact and the record regarding Chantel Krebs. As a state legislator in Pierce, South Dakota, Chantel Krebs in 2011 voted for SB 38 and SB 43. You know what those legislation was? That was for
Educate me.
That was for the implementation. SB 38 and 43, which were voted for by Chantel Krebs, were for the implementation and streamlining of Obamacare in South Dakota. Now, if this is the way that we drain the swamp, I can tell you there's probably not a lot of sense in sending pure alligators to D.C. and expecting that they're going to do away with the wetland. We need to be real about these things and what's happening. Dusty Johnson talks about his support for the Second Amendment. Meanwhile, he's part of the administration. Governor Dennis Daugaard, in that administration, Dusty Johnson, his chief of staff, there were 3 attempts made for constitutional carry in the state of South Dakota. All of them died at the governor's doorstep.
At the governor's
desk. So if we're going to talk about being an NRA member, if we're going to talk about supporting the Second Amendment, let's be real and let's compare the action of record and the record of action with the words that come out of the mouth. And people need to be very clear about the choice in this election. If we're going to listen to campaign ads and we're going to say, well, Dusty talks very nicely about supporting the Second Amendment. Look at the record. Look at the affiliation. Look at what the administration did. Look at the track record of these people. Do not listen to words, because politicians are good at one thing. They're good at words.
Check the votes.
They're good at words. Check the actions. We know actions speak far louder than words.
Yes, they do. I know part of the things as far as running a business, government wants you to do things. Hire the handicapped. I did hire the handicapped. She was a registered Democrat. We've since cured her. She's no longer handicapped.
Was that her handicap?
Yeah. She's now a Republican.
You cured her of her disability.
Of her disability.
Wow. That is quite a deal. You better not let that out of the bag, because we'll have massive applications for disability.
Lay your hands on the radio. Is there anything else either one of you would like to add?
In the conversation that Neal lays out so brilliantly in talking about the Islamic refugee resettlement situation, let's look at this.
That's the next death trap coming our way.
Let's take it. Well, let's identify it for what it is. This is an effort to resettle and reorganize the entire globe. What they're doing, the socialists and communists and the Marxists in our midst that have long wanted to rearrange the world and erase American freedom and diminish human liberty around the world, have had their eye on rearranging the socioeconomics inside the United States. And we heard a long time. We heard through the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, all the way up until very recently, that the way that they were going to do that was through the redistribution of wealth. Well, it turns out, Carl, that process took far too long. And what they've decided to do instead is to be able to import populations of poor people, reduce the standard of living, place such a burden on the entitlement system that they wreck the country. And when the country's wrecked, then you can replace it with the system of your preference. And that's where we're headed. And we're watching it happen in Western Europe.
Cloward and Piven.
Carl Grimmelman gets the gold star for the day. But absolutely, this is what is happening. They're using these populations to crash the systems of peaceful Western countries and institute police state fascism.
It's backdoor socialism. So really, the difficulty of having accumulation of power in the hands of a few, for instance, in the meatpacking industry, is that they're relying on this cheap slave labor. Refugee resettlement is a part of that, where they actually hire people at $9 to $11 an hour, that they don't reach the cap of Medicaid, so the state then picks up the health care and all the expenses that go along with, life. Yeah. And so it's really backdooring this socialist program where the state picks up all of the necessities of life. and it's taking away hardworking Americans' jobs in the meantime. Meatpacking plants used to pay $20 an hour 20 or 30 years ago. Right now, they've driven down the prices of labor so much that Americans can't make a living doing it. And that's not fair.
I lived 13 years in Cherokee, Iowa. Wilson Packing Company. That plant is now closed. In Storm Lake, Iowa, just 30 miles down the road, another huge packing plant where if your native language is American English, you're overqualified.
Mm-hmm.
And the wages have gone down, the crime's gone up.
Dusty Johnson was proud that he was endorsed by the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers, who run Americans for Prosperity and different organizations, they sell themselves as a low-tax economic prosperity type of program. They're for open borders. They want amnesty. His biggest endorsement, you talked about endorsements earlier, his biggest endorsement are the group of people that are pushing Paul Ryan to accept illegal immigration and open borders. That's real. You got to fight that. That's what Donald Trump is trying to protect American workers and American jobs, and the Koch brothers and the George Soros and their like are pushing an exact opposite agenda. And we got to fight. That's what's going to protect our American farmers and ranchers and producers, American jobs. We have to bring this back.
It amazes me. We hear the left calling our president a fascist or a Nazi. George Soros was a Nazi.
Yeah.
As a youth.
And he was proud of it.
Yes, still is.
He never ever, he thought it was one of the greatest jobs in his life to turn
Yes.
in fellow Jews. And there he's heralded amongst
Yes.
the left.
I know. How can you have both thoughts in your head at the same time?
See, and you just nailed it right there. The point, what they are doing right now is a fostered sense of cognitive dissonance. Because if you can inject, truth, I like to refer to it sometimes as the post-reality era. We've come to a point where facts no longer matter. The narrative can be shaped by anybody at any time saying whatever it is that they want to say, regardless of whether there's factual basis. There's a push right now, even in that discussion about George Soros, to refute the fact that he ever said, which happened, by the way, in a 60 Minutes interview on CBS of all places, he admitted, that he enjoyed his time as a purveyor and somebody that was helping the Nazis confiscate goods and identify and turn in his fellow Jews in Austria. And now there's a push to deny the fact that he was ever a Nazi. There are people in those same places. CNN has been pushing back against people who've been talking openly about this very conversation.
Clinton News Network?
Saying that it's there you go, or Communist News
Communist News Network.
Whichever, take your pick.
Any difference?
No,
Repeat yourself.
Sliver distinction. But yeah, there's a push now that anybody who even has that conversation is looked at as a quote-unquote conspiracy theorist, even though he admitted it with his own mouth. That's where we are.
Look what they're doing on President Trump's animal comments.
Oh,